Good afternoon, boys and girls. Today we're going to look at the form of ownership known as the personal liability company. This kind of company's name must end in the letters INC, standing for incorporated. So let's look at the definition of a personal liability company. First of all, it is very similar to that of a private company, but the only difference is that the directors of a personal liability company are jointly and severally liable. So this means that the directors actually have unlimited liability. And as I mentioned earlier, the name must end in NIC. Let's have a look at some of the characteristics. The members of a personal liability company have unlimited liability, meaning that they are responsible for all the debts of a business. Just like a private company, they also need to complete a memorandum of incorporation or an MOI and is registered at Sub C. Similar to the private company, they have a minimum of one director. So there are lots of characteristics that are very similar to that of a private company. Let's look at the advantages and the disadvantages. Again, one can say that the advantages and disadvantages are similar to those of a private company, except that the directors of a personal liability company have that unlimited liability, so that is a disadvantage. However, the advantages are such that they have access to far more finance than other companies, so their potential for growth is that much greater. The disadvantage is that their auditing costs are very high because they need to publish their financial records. And because they are registering with Sub C and completing a memorandum of incorporation, there are lots of legal requirements. So grade 10s and 11s, that really is the gist of the incorporated company, the personal liability company. Now matrics, moving on to the success or failure factors contributed to the personal liability company. If we look at capacity, there's no limit to the number of shareholders, so this means that expansion can take place. The failure is that if it cannot grow into a very large business, it cannot invite the public to buy shares in the business. In terms of management, the public liability company is managed by a competent board of directors who may be experts in their fields. So quick decisions can be made because you only need to have one director. The other positive for the management is that shareholders can vote for the appointment of the most capable directors to manage the company. The disadvantage, however, or failure, is that directors may not have a direct interest in the company, which can then hamper the growth and the profit that one would expect. The public liability company and its shareholders are compelled to budget a larger amount for directors' remuneration to attract the best directors, so directors' fees are rather high. If we look at taxation, the positive is that the personal liability company can get tax rebates. They can also obtain government tenders and renew their licenses if they do not evade tax. They only pay tax after business expenses have been deducted, and companies and shareholders are taxed separately, so there's a double taxation. However, the failure side of it is the fact that they are subject to this double taxation. In other words, shareholders pay secondary tax, and this can have a negative impact to a company that is already battling financially. Moving on to capital as a criteria. Capital can be increased by getting more shareholders on board. However, the failure is that if they cannot grow into the very large business, they can't invite the public to buy shares into it. The division of profits. High profits and good returns to shareholders indicate the success of a company, which increases the value of shares. However, the downside is shareholders may sell their shares when the dividends are low, resulting in a drop in the share price. Dividends are also not always paid out, which may discourage new investors from joining. In terms of legislation, the success factor is that the company and its owners or shareholders are separate entities, which may encourage more people to join the company. Directors are forced by the New Companies Act to be responsible and work harder towards the success of the company so as to protect their personal assets. Directors actually sign performance contracts which then motivate them to perform professionally and ethically. The downside is that this lengthy registration requirement may delay the actual operation of a business and shareholders can lose on profitable opportunities. So it is expensive to register this form of ownership and it increases a business's overall expenses, thus reducing their profits. The drawing up of directors' performance contracts may be time consuming and once again increases costs. Auditing is required only if a public liability company meets the required tests for solvency and liquidity, which leads to extra auditing costs. Thank you, boys and girls. I hope that you now have a better understanding of a personal liability company.